Welcome back to the Legal Cheek podcast and to the launch of its sixth season. My name is Julia Szanislo. I'm a writer and editor here, and I'm joined by my lovely colleague Ryan Scott, who is also a writer and editor at Legal Cheek.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. So, today we'll be talking about the absolute madness that has dominated the legal market over the last couple of weeks. The headlines have been talking about nothing but merger madness. Big Law is obviously no stranger to mergers. Some of the most prestigious and well-known law firms in the cities were formed this way. However, since the finalisation of A&O Sherman's merger last year and HSF Kramer's earlier this summer, a few more transatlantic partnerships have been announced. In this episode, we'll be discussing the three tie-ups that have been made over the last month alone: Ashurst and Perkins Coie, Taylor Wessing and Winston Strawn, and just a few days ago, Hogan Lovells and Cadwalader. So, I was thinking we could go chronologically. Ryan, if I could hand over to you. Ashurst and Perkins Coie. That was a month ago now, but it doesn't really feel like that.
Yeah, as you say, it's been a whirlwind of a time the past month or so. Ashurst and Perkins Coie was announced on the 17th of November, so a month and 5 days ago now. It's expected to close in quarter three of 2026. I think they've got it scheduled for now, but it's still subject to partner approval. The combined entity, Ashurst Perkins Coie, will have 3,000 lawyers across 52 offices in 23 countries it is, and it will have combined revenues of 2.7 billion. So as you said there, A&O Shearman was one of we had HSF Kramer this year and then A&O Shearman last year. I think this is the biggest one we've had since A&O Shearman is how they're branding it, and it will be one of the top 20 law firms created by revenue. I think it's something like somewhere high up there in terms of the number of staff they'll have is the fifth biggest law firm in the world, something like that.
Yeah.
Just a little bit about the two firms that are merging. Ashurst was founded in London in 1822, so it's been around for a very long time. Just over 30 offices across Europe, the Middle East, Asia, the Americas, and Australia after a 2012 tie-up with a firm called Blake Dawson. They had quite a lot of Australasian offices, and they currently have 1,900 lawyers across the globe. Um, in terms of like practice area and sector expertise at Ashurst, it's pretty much a full service firm. They've got cross-border M&A, energy, infrastructure, real estate, and financial services are the main bread and butter though. Then we've got Perkins Coie. Perkins Coie is a US firm. It was founded in 1912 in Seattle. It has just over 20 offices, and they're all primarily concentrated across the US, but there's also an office in London, a couple in China, I think. I think there's Shanghai and Beijing, and then there's also one in Taiwan. And they've got 1,000 lawyers across the globe. So as I say, altogether, what's that going to be? About 3,000 lawyers across 52 offices in 23 countries. So that's a huge firm it's going to create. The managing partners of both firms, or should I say chief executive, they call it Ashurst, have both come out to kind of say why they think this merger is ideal or why it's necessary. Bill Malley at Perkins Coie says the firm's clients have needs that cut across borders and the tie would help meet those needs. And then Paul Jenkins at Ashurst says our clients were asking us to have a depth of capacity in the US, which we don't, capability, sorry, in the US, which we don't have at the moment.
Yeah.
Um, to be honest, it just seems like the key reason behind all of this is geographical expansion. Ashurst has a US presence already, but it's small. I think they have about three offices. I think it's Austin, Los Angeles, and New York,
Yeah.
whereas Perkins Coie has 20 offices, and most of them are in the US already, spread about everywhere. So Ashurst gains this really strong foothold in the US quite easily without having to set up more offices over there. And Perkins Coie gains access to Perkins Coie. Perkins Coie gains access to Europe, Middle East, Asia, Australasia, everywhere else that Ashurst is around the globe.
Mm.
Um, so to be honest, it's just complementary, I guess, location offerings that they've got that makes this a really strong fit. Mali, who I said before is the managing partner at Perkins Coie, he also said that a much larger firm would make it easier to hire technology specialists who could help lawyers make better use of AI in the work. So it also seems that they're keen to leverage any kind of AI and legal tech in this merger, which we'll also see when it comes to Hogan Lovells Cadwalader was one of the reasons they get behind their merger as well.
Yeah.
Um, Another interesting thing about the merger is that it seems to be a merger mostly of equals. We see sometimes this kind of discourse around whether it's a merger of equals or a secret takeover. Like
Yeah, we'll
it's
see
branded as one.
that.
Yeah, where one's much bigger than the other, or one's much more prestigious than the other, something like this. But here it seems like um Ashurst and Perkins Coie have quite similar revenue figures. I can't give you the exact ones off the top of my head because I cannot remember, but I could
No, you're right.
Google them.
They're quite well matched, I think. I mean,
Yeah.
spoilers, but we'll see in the next one that we'll talk about with Taylor Wessing. It's a little more uneven, and I think that might
Mm.
have quite a few implications for the not necessarily the success of it, but perhaps the structure of how this merger is going to play out. I think how are they combining with sort of practice area, sort of how are they matching up with their practice area specialisms?
Well, with Ashurst, as I say, they're a full service firm, so they're pretty much good at everything. The bread and butter is cross-border M&A, energy infrastructure projects, real estate, stuff like that. I think that's where I think Ashurst was historically known for doing a lot of work on the London railways back in the 1800s.
Mm,
And that's kind of where they get that project historical expertise and renown for. And Perkins Coie is very much concentrated in tech, IP, corporate litigation, privacy, fintech, and life sciences. Very technical practice areas. So I think whilst Ashurst probably already has a strong grounding in those practice areas that Perkins Coie does do, it just kind of adds to it and adds more depth to those practice areas for clients who are in those spaces.
yeah.
So I think there's a lot of strengths there. I think one of the things that is interesting about this merger, though, is it's been in discussion since February. It's been under negotiation since February, according to the FT. But in March, Perkins Coie was hit with an executive order from the Trump
Mm,
administration.
yeah.
Um, that does a lot of things, but one of the main things is that kind of debars you from doing any government-related legal work, and quite a lot of like the lawyers just didn't have access to a lot of government, I don't know, institutions and documents and things like that. So it's interesting to see that despite this happening after they entered into negotiations, Ashurst was still keen to go ahead with Perkins Coie and merge. So there must be quite a lot of strength and synergies there that they see because they were completely, well, it seems like they was unfazed by it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think that's it for Ashurst and Perkins Coie. So I'll pass over to you to have a discussion about our next.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next one that we've got is Taylor Wessing merging with Winston and Strawn. So a little bit of background. Taylor Wessing is broadly known by some, I would say, as Anglo-German, um, because it was formed through this merger back in the day of Taylor Johnson Garrett and the German firm Wessing, Berenberg and Goslar. So they operate under a unique structure called a Verein structure, which means that there are lots of different Taylor Wessing outfits across Europe, but they don't necessarily share profit. They sort of operate as individual but collaborative entities. They've got strong reputation in London, in IP, in tech, in life sciences, and also quite strong venture capital practice area, especially also on top of that, pretty decent mid-market private equity practice. In terms of revenue, uh, the UK arm of Taylor Wessing is certainly pulling its weight. As a whole, they have a revenue of around 500 million, half a million, 500 million, 500 million globally. But the UK arm sort of, I think, generates around the majority of it, so around just under 300 million. So they have quite a very strong European footprint and very like known for their work-life balance culture, especially compared to US firms, which is think something that we'll go on to talk about. On the other hand, we've got Winston and Strawn. They're Chicago headquartered, well known for their IP as well, IP litigation in particular, and just they have expertise in transactional practice areas, but they're certainly much more of a litigious focused firm, as with lots of US firms. They do have a London presence. It's quite small. I think in terms of trainee intake, which is always a fun metric to measure by, Taylor Wessing have 20 trainees usually, and Winston and Strawn only take in two. So they have attempted to sort of break into the London market, but they seem to have found it a little difficult to get that really strong foothold. In terms of their financials, they are as expected, a lot stronger than Taylor Wessing. So their revenue is over a billion dollars, I think around 1.27, 1.3. And their profit per equity partner is also a lot higher. I think theirs is around $3.5 million. So that's a classic case of it being, quite different between a typical UK outfit and a US one. In terms of the tie-up itself, it was announced around, I think, a week ago, maybe just over a week ago.
Yeah.
They've been talking about it for a while as well. The combined firm would have 1,400 lawyers, 20 offices, across sort of the US, where Winston Strawn were, UK, Europe, Middle East, a bit in Latin America as well. Not very much in Asia, as opposed, or sort of the Pacific regions, as opposed to Ashurst, which is quite interesting. And they would be operating under the name Winston Taylor. So a key thing to bear in mind with this is that the entirety of Taylor Wessing is not merging. It's just the Taylor Wessing UK. So the German arm, the Wessing part, is staying behind, and the UK, the Netherlands, and Belgium are to go with the new firm, which is quite interesting. I think it's also interesting that Eastern Europe is splitting away from the new structure alongside Germany. So they're going to have a cooperation agreement, which will mean that they'll get to sort of maintain those relationships that have been built up both with clients and amongst offices. But that's quite an interesting thing, and I think it's got quite a bit to do with, well, there's different ways of sort of running businesses in Germany, different profitable areas that they work on. Germany's relationship with the German office's relationship with the US and US clients has generally been, I think, based more around infrastructure and industry, whereas I think the UK office is certainly wanting to tap into that private capital strength that is so, I think, emblematic of the way US firms do things. But yeah, so I think the rationale behind the tie-up is to just for the US side to really build its European platform. If anything, I think it really just tells us how important London still is and how important it still remains as a gateway to Europe despite Brexit. And it is still vital despite sort of any other kind of strategic doubts that firms may have to perceived success. And obviously, for Taylor Wessing, a strong US presence. There is no other reason, I don't think, access to that US litigation and capital markets credibility that you just don't get in the same way in the UK. But yeah, I'm curious mostly about the differences in scale, which I alluded to earlier. Um, Taylor Wessing is a lot smaller than Winston Strawn in revenue, and I think a lot different in culture. And I think that's something we'll go on to talk about more. Um, but yeah, the differences in billable target hours are quite stark. I think Winston and Strawn have 2,000 hours, whereas Taylor Wessing, I think it's 1,600. Um, and also there's just differences in pay, and I'm curious to see how that will match up once they do merge. Lots of people have been saying, is this really a merger? Remains to be seen. Ryan,
I think they're quite
thoughts?
keen. They're quite keen to assert that it's is a merger of equal. I think I saw that in the FT that is a merger of equals, and then they're saying it's absolutely not a bolt-on acquisition or anything along those lines. I think it's quite similar to actually Hogan Lovells, Cadwalader, in terms of, as you say, kind of like pay, revenues, kind of the size of the firm, and one's much bigger than the other one.
Yeah,
Um, and I believe it's Cadwallader. I did actually Google before this because the firm I have never heard pronounced before. I've only seen written down.
yeah, no,
But alas, Hogan Lovells, it's a global law firm. It itself was born from a merger in 2010 between a US firm, Hogan and Hartson, and a UK firm called Lovells. They have 35 offices with extensive reach across pretty much all over the globe, Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia, Pacific, and the Americas. They already have a very, as a result of the merger in 2010, they already have quite a very strong presence in the US. They have around 2,800 lawyers, as I say, full service global firm. but its bread and butter is corporate and M&A, regulatory and government affairs, litigation disputes, IP and tech, life sciences, and healthcare, stuff like that. Whereas Cadwalader is much, much, much smaller. It was founded in 1792, and
Oh, wow.
according to its website, it claims to be Wall Street's oldest firm, which
Yeah.
I thought was quite interesting. Um, it has five offices only. It has one in New York, Washington, Charlotte, Dublin, and London. And throughout my research for this podcast, I found out apparently Charlotte is the second financial center of the US, which shocks me because North Carolina doesn't kind of strike me as as,
Really?
yeah, as like a financial epicenter, I
Miami's been
guess.
coming up with all the sort of private wealth going there.
I could see that. I could see that. I guess not LA. LA is a bit too. It doesn't seem financial epicenter, but I don't know. North Carolina didn't strike me for some reason. Maybe somewhere in Texas, like Houston or Austin. I don't know. But yeah. So they've got offices in only five locations. They do have one in London, but I believe they only have about 70 lawyers. And Hogan Lovells London office is, I think, one of its largest ones with a couple, definitely a couple hundred lawyers, maybe 1,000. And across the globe, Cadwalader has around 400 lawyers, so nowhere near as big as the 2,800 at Hogan Lovells. Um, their specialisms are quite niche, actually. It's to do with finance and capital markets. So they are particular renowned in securitization, leverage finance, bank lending, real estate finance, derivatives, bankruptcy and restructuring, those sort of things. So in terms of what each actually bring to the merger, Cadwalader brings this top tier finance and capital markets expertise, as we just spoke about, this very long history on Wall Street, and it's developed relationships with financial institutions and private capital providers. Um, and it's also got strength in these niche finance practice areas like structured products, which although Hogan Lovells will definitely have some expertise in, I don't think it will be because they're a much more broader full service practice. I don't believe they have these kind of niche finance people there. Whereas at Cadwallader, this is their bread and butter. This is what they do day in, day out. And then in terms of what Hogan Lovells brings to the merger, it's quite obvious. It's a global full service firm with strengths across all major practice areas, a smattering of band one rankings across literally every practice you could imagine, office locations across all the G20 countries. Um, and then just an enviable client base with multinational corporates and regulated sector specialists. It's kind of, it's not complementary what they do, but I think what Cadwallader adds to this merger is depth in these really niche finance practice areas that they're kind of known for on Wall Street,
Hmm. Yeah.
where Hogan Lovells might not have kind of the same expertise right now or the same number as lawyers who are specializing in that when that's all Cadwalader does. Well, not all. They are good at litigation and some corporate stuff too, but there's a much more smaller and fast growing practices there, whereas what they are known for is the very specialist finance things. Um, so yeah, I think clients are increasingly wanting, I guess, I think we might have used this phrase before. You see it written all the time, a one-stop shop,
Yeah.
uh, a, a law firm that can handle their global finance, their cross-border deals, their litigation and regulatory matters, all under one roof. And I think that's what Hogan Lovells Cadwallader will bring. Um, Hogan Lovells has also made like significant investment into AI and legal tech. I think they've got their own kind of proprietary legal tech they've made in-house that they haven't sourced from anywhere else. Like a lot of firms are now using Harvey and Copilot and things like that, but Hogan Lovells has spent a lot of money on developing its own. And they've said as part of the merger they are quite keen to deliver more enhanced efficiency and unlock extra value for clients. All this lingo to do with implementing AI and legal tech at the firm. So Cadwalader can definitely, well, Lovells Cadwalader can definitely benefit from these kind of synergies that they've got going on. Um, I think that's it in terms of the three mergers that have happened over the past month. As you did say at the beginning, there was HSF Kramer back in,
Yeah,
has
it
it
was
said
finalized in
June?
June. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
June.
yeah.
There was also McDermott Schultz, which was McDermott, Will and Emery, and another firm, Schultz. Um, I can't remember the full name. And last year we had, was it last year or 2023 now? A&O Shearman
It
to
was
become.
announced in 2023, but then finalized sort of May 24. But yeah, that's
Mm,
been sort of, I think people are quite used to that now.
yeah,
Especially for those of you who have only just started applying to law firms, you would have thought A&O Sherman have been around forever, but no.
it's
A&O
no longer got the
Sherman.
novelty to it and the excitement that it once did.
No, no, it doesn't. But yeah, I suppose what this really screams to me is that this transatlantic corridor that's been sort of building itself up over the last couple of years between, well, usually New York, but also other major hubs in the US,
North
like Chicago
Carolina.
and North Carolina. God, yeah,
Mm,
it's just becoming sort of like the focus of so many law firms' aspirations.
mm,
I mean, I see constantly in the legal news that everyone's just saying, "Oh, who's going to be next? Who's going to be the next firm that decides that they want to
yeah.
merge with another big US, or not necessarily even big, just a US outfit?" They
It's
just,
exciting though. It's
yeah.
exciting to hear and put your bets on different firms. I am also part of that camp who wonder who is next. I
Like,
think because everyone wants a foothold in the US, and it's hard to, I guess, organically grow over there if you don't already have a presence. It's a lot of investment to actually go find an office over there, and then you've got to go hire the lawyers, whether you're going to go kind of try and poach them from another firm or just kind of hire them organically. And then even thinking about the point of starting your own training cohort, quite a lot of firms will settle down in a new location first for a couple of years before they think about even taking on any trainees. And it's all just a significant amount of investment. Whereas if you have a firm over there who seems like the right cultural fit and just complement your practice area offerings already and kind of your locations already, then why not merge with them? It seems like a lot smarter idea.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, you've seen firms that want to come over and really set up here have to go to like great lengths. And I mean, the obvious example is Paul Weiss. They really had to,
mm,
I mean, put the effort in to re-establish themselves because they've been here for a while. But in order to grow, it takes significant investment and
yeah.
significant, time and effort. And they've only just established their training contract offering. So yeah, if you want to hit the ground running, merge, I suppose.
And
Who's next? Travis Smith or something.
what a banger they've hit with that with their training contract offering. I think it's 180K for the NQ pay at Paul
Yeah.
Weiss, and their office is fantastic. They've refitted the Twitter office in the West End near
Yeah.
all their private client
Yeah,
clients,
like equity. Yeah, all the
private
houses are there,
capital
aren't they?
clients. That's what I mean in near Mayfair. It's a lovely office. So yeah, and I think I read something about Paul Weiss the other day that they've expanded their headcount in the London office by at least over 100% in the past 3 or 4 years, something crazy like that. So as you say, yeah, it's a lot of you have to kind of have to go balls to the wall with it if you are going to expand naturally.
Yeah. I suppose what challenges, I think that's a good point to
Mhm.
talk about next. We've briefly touched on them. So we've got cultural differences, we've got differences in pay, and well, you had another one that you wanted to talk about, what was it?
Impact on trainees and queue
Yeah.
retention, which is the big one. I think if, with the cultural aspect first is always talk about whether you want to be kind of you want to work at a US firm or you want to work at a UK firm. And I think this is a very prominent thing that people who are applying to aspiring solicitors think about before they start applying for their training contracts. With US firms, is kind of this idea that they're a lot fiercer, a lot more competitive, a lot more cutthroat. And that the way you said earlier about work-life balance is a lot more you're expected to be in the office a lot more and have less of a life at home at US firms. At least that's kind of the stereotype that's going about them. It's
Yeah.
not all of these are kind of like not necessarily always reign true, but I think this is how people tend to conceptualize them. And then UK firms, I think people tend to think are a lot more collaborative and collegial, comparative to US firms. Um, and obviously, there's a lot more nuance than that. It's not always true. If you look at the kind of average working hours we have on the legal cheat most list, some of the US firms are making UK firms are making you work a lot more than US firms,
Yeah.
and vice versa. Like it's just a lot more nuance than that. But I think it's also reflected this kind of like cultural divide or these ideas we have about US and UK firms culture is reflected in how the law firms are kind of set up. So a lot of US firms we see eat what you kill models of partnership where your partner compensation relates to how much work you actually bring into the firm. So you get paid more money if you're bringing in more work to the
Yeah.
firm. So obviously you're going to be a lot more incentivized to kind of keep more work for yourself because you're going to get a bigger bonus or you're going to get paid more for that. Whereas UK firms, you often see a lot of lockstep models. So your compensation as a partner goes up with the amount of time you've been there for. So if you've been there 5 years, you're actually going to get paid a lot more than if you've been there for 1 year. So it kind of rewards loyalty to the firm. And I think this is kind of where these cultural notions come from. Um, but yeah, I think in terms of the merger we talked about, and if there's going to be any cultural clashes or difficulty integrating, with Hogan Lovells Cadwalader, for example, um, it might become a case that at Cadwalader, it's a Wall Street firm. They're all mainly finance lawyers there, in very niche practices. The finance partners might start to feel lost in like this huge global machine that is kind of like Hogan Lovells. Whereas at Hogan Lovells, the non-finance lawyers, even though obviously they do have their own finance lawyers, might start feeling like, oh, the firm's becoming too Wall Street. Probably not, because Cadwalader is a lot smaller than Hogan Lovells is, so
Mm.
arguably its impact will be lesser culturally on the firm. But there's always these kind of like issues that there could be some cultural integration, which is a difficulty. Do you have anything you want to add on that?
I think one of the sort of typical hallmarks of US teams or US training contracts in London is always that they're smaller.
Yeah.
I think when people do want to join a US firm, they do it in the knowledge that they'll sort of be working in that lean team model. You'll have
Mm,
fewer people, you'll perhaps be working um, in closer contact with partners and senior associates. And I think that's a real big selling point for for some people, especially if they want that very independent, entrepreneurial way of training.
yeah.
And I suppose if you are merging with huge outfits like Hogan Lovells, or even more medium-sized ones, or upper medium-sized ones like Taylor Wessing, like Ashurst, you are inevitably going to get swallowed up into this slightly more, I guess, English style of training where there's more trainees, perhaps it's more structured,
Yeah.
perhaps there's more, um, not necessarily bureaucracy, but you're going to be going through more layers, perhaps to talk to a partner because there'll be more trainees on a team than just the one.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess that's just a matter of making sure you understand how the training contract is structured when you're applying, and knowing that if you want that US lean team style, you may have to go looking somewhere else now. But yeah, I'm curious to see if it will go the other way, if the US style will bleed in to the way
Yeah.
that some of these firms do things. I don't know. It remains to be seen, really.
I think what you mentioned there as well, though, about impact on trainees is also quite a big issue with or challenge with
Yeah.
mergers, in that I can't give exact numbers, but just think of Sherman, for example. Sherman Sterling had quite a small office in London. I think maybe they took on like 5 trainees a year, was one of the smaller ones. It was just a kind of smaller US, I won't say satellite office, but one that had not a necessarily big training contract. And A&O Alan Novery, before it was the Sherman, um, was a Magic Circle firm who took on 70, 80 trainees each year. So there was a big difference there. And the trainees who would have gone to Sherman Sailing thinking, yes, I would absolutely love this. As you say, entrepreneurial, lean teams, give me lots of responsibility from the get-go. Let me hit the ground running. I want to speak to the partner every day. They could have been sorely disappointed when there was that merger, and they're now part of this much, much bigger team, that they might not necessarily have bargained for or thought about when they were first applying for their training contract. Um, so I think that's definitely one thing as well. I think the impact of the trainees who are coming from these two different firms and are thinking this isn't what I necessarily wanted. And I think sometimes this can be reflected in retention rates as well. So you might see a few trainees leave after they're qualified because they thought, I no longer, this isn't what I wanted. I'll do my training contract now that you've merged, but I don't want this. I'm going to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Or alternatively, the retention rates might go down because now you've got a much bigger training cohort from the combination of the two. Um, and there might be less NQ roles to go around. Say, for example, A&O Sherman was, I don't know, offering still only 80 trainee roles, and now you got the extra 5 trainees from Sherman and Sterling on top. There might be fewer roles to go around. That might cause problems with deciding where people are going to qualify, if they can qualify, or whether they need to go find their job elsewhere. So
Yeah.
there is definitely that issue of a capacity at NQ level. And then she says, well, different training cultures, like the US style is more practice driven, and Hogan Lovells it will be as a much bigger firm, will be more structured, international rotations, things like that.
Yeah.
And also might determine kind of which practice areas you're allowed to sit in. If you go into a kind of a finance heavy US firm, you probably expect to do a lot more like leverage finance and stuff like that. Whereas if you go into a full service firm, a Magic Circle firm, you've kind of got all the practice areas in the world to go and try during your training contracts.
Wow.
And I think finally, just on that topic of impact on trainees and NQs, it's just questions over which salary scale and qualification
Yeah.
pathway will dominate. Like if the US firms tend to pay more NQ, that's generally almost always true. Um,
What are the differences between the the two that you looked at? Because for
I will.
Winston and Strawn and Taylor Wessing, it's around 50 grand. So Taylor Wessing are 110 grand for NQ pounds, and Winston and
That
Strawn around 160. So it's a significant difference.
Yeah, that is huge. I know Ashurst is 140, and I believe Perkins Coie is. I'm just gonna Google that one. Just two ticks. Perkins Coie
So
NQ salary.
it's certainly going to, while you look that up, I can look up the other ones.
176k is Perkins Coie, and
Ooh.
Ashurst is 140. So there's 36k differential there.
Yeah.
Um, but
Hogan
one
Lovells
picture,
140 as of now,
140.
and Cadwalader is 120.
I've got two figures.
I've got different figures.
Well, let's not speak on Cadwallader because we're getting different figures.
Yeah, they seem to be different. Regardless, I think there is a difference, well, especially in Taylor Wessing and Winston Straw, a
Yeah.
significant enough difference that I wonder which way the scale will tip. In a sense, will it
Mm,
even out? Will there be differences whilst sort of the dust
yeah.
settles? What do you think?
That is the thing as well. Like with Winston and Strawn, that did you say they only take on two trainees a year?
As far as I know, yeah.
It's probably a lot more, or it's a lot more affordable to pay two trainees 180k a year or however much it is than it is to pay
Yeah.
the other 50 that are now coming along from whichever from Taylor Wessing. I can't
Yeah.
20 is it the take on?
Funny. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so there's when you're a much smaller US firm, I guess you can afford to pay these high figures as well. And also the practice areas they work in are often the most kind of profitable and revenue generating, like the
Mhm.
finance and the corporate M&A, the big ticket work. They earn a lot of money, so they can afford to pay trainees this amount of money. But when you're taking on all of these new trainees, it's probably going to be less of a case of that everyone's getting paid at this very high rate,
Yeah.
um,
We go down.
which is a bit disappointing for the people who come from the US firm. I wonder if maybe perhaps they're allowed to qualify on the salary they was expecting to get, but
If it'll be
I don't know for
staggered.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like you get what you
um,
signed up for, and then everyone else who's applying afterwards will have to
yeah. I
reevaluate.
mean, I'm not feeling. I don't feel particularly bad for someone who's still getting paid
Yeah.
over 100 grand either way, but you would
I
be a
think
bit
they'll be fine. Yeah.
yeah,
They'll
it'd
be
be a
all
little bit
right.
miffed if you was getting paid 50k less than you thought you would be. But
Yeah. I'm sure they'll survive.
alas.
But yeah,
Yeah. I think there's one more challenge actually, and it's partner pay and profitability just before we finish up.
that's true.
Um mm, it's just to do with there's sometimes differences in the amount of revenue or profits that these firms generate. I think I had a look with Ashurst and Perkins Coie, and I did mention earlier I couldn't remember the exact figures off the top of my head, but if I Google them now, I believe they're both in the $1 million range. So they're on the higher scale of that range, but they're both in the $1 million range. And if you look at some of the other firms, for example, I think I'm not sure with Taylor Wessing and Winston Strawn, but I believe
Yeah.
one's like £1 million and the other one's in the $3.9
Yeah.
billion dollars.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the conversion rate, but I know that $3.9 billion dollars and £1 billion aren't that close together.
Yeah. I
Um,
think what you mean, revenue.
yes.
Yeah, revenue I think was sort of 1.27 billion for Winston Strawn and then half a
Ah,
billion for Taylor Wessing and even less for its um UK sort of operations. So yeah, so the big difference.
mm. I
Difference.
think I'm talking about PEP, profit per equity.
Oh, yeah, that was a one and a three. One and
Yeah,
a 3 difference.
that's what I was remembering because PEP as well is a big issue because when you look at the partnership, when they come together, how are they going to reconcile that one of them's getting paid 3 million a year on average, and the other one's getting paid 1 million a year on average. Like there's a big difference there. Does everyone get paid at the bigger amount, or is it now we just kind of average out now that you're a merged firm? Because
Yeah.
certainly going to be some very happy people from the lesser paying firm who's just like, oh, there's a million more for me, and then some very upset people at the US firm
Yeah.
that are getting a million less than before. But yeah, there's a lot of questions and challenges of merging law firms. But I mean, we've seen it happen successfully many a times in the past. Like as I say, Hogan Lovells was the product of a US firm and the UK firm merger, and I kind of think everyone just thinks about it as just Hogan Lovells. It's always been Hogan Lovells. Everyone just kind of forgets it was a merger. Same with Ashurst. Ashurst has done like a lot of mergers in its time.
Yeah.
Um, and all these have gone successfully. Even HSF Kramer in June this year, I don't think we've had, it's all been
It's been
positive news since it's happened. Yeah. And, Shaman as well. It's been mainly positive news since it happened. So I think it's quite exciting. There's a lot of unknowns, but I feel like in the end, it could be a very exciting time to see who's next in line in this. What did we call it? Merger madness.
Yeah, I know.
Mm.
We did merger madness. I think the key takeaway from this is that mergers have always, especially for the last couple of decades, been a part of the way that law firms, develop and enter new
Mm.
markets and, act as businesses in their own right. I think the thing to keep an eye out for is where they happen, how they happen, and sort of why they're happening in such quick succession. Perhaps it's the end of the year, maybe finalizing things.
Yeah,
But yeah, for me, it's this transatlantic corridor. I know that's been coined by, I think it was the lawyer, probably was the lawyer.
probably.
But yeah, it's clearly the way to go. And as you say, we'll probably see a few more. Well, it's taken a few options off the table for firms that were looking perhaps to merge.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll see. That was actually the thing that maybe it should have been another firm that was going to merge with Ashurst. There were talks about it merging with Latham, weren't there?
I
Years
have
ago.
seen, I've seen, yeah, I read that in the FT, and there's been with Taylor Wessing as well. I think there was talks of it or rumors of it merging with another one the weeks before it happened, and then all of a sudden it just came out of nowhere that they were merging. Um,
So
but
snap,
yeah,
snap them up. That's the
snap them up before
takeaway.
someone else does. Yeah,
It's bidding war. But yeah, thank you everyone for listening. This has been the Legal Cheek podcast with me, Julia Szanislo.
and me, Ryan Scott. I hope you've enjoyed, everybody.
Yeah, and have a lovely rest of the day. Bye bye.
Bye, guys.